Hey there, this is Derek Murphy. I wanted to talk a little bit about Nanowrimo, which is National Novel Writing Month, and the question, are you a good writer? Because on Facebook, on Reddit, I'm in a lot of Nanowrimo groups, so I see a lot of the questions that come up. And now we're on day 8, so we're almost 10 days, almost a third of the way into Nanowrimo, which is a challenge with the goal of writing 50,000 words in 1 month. And generally, it's sort of an invitation for newer writers to commit to finishing what could become a full-length manuscript for a book. So there's a lot of people who are interested in writing and feel creative, but they've never really been able to finish a full book before. So for those people who are sort of the amateurs, amateur comes from to do it for the love. It just means they're very passionate, but they don't have the experience yet. And so for those newer authors, they're going to face for the very first time a lot of difficulties and challenges that they probably didn't expect. However, what I wanted to kind of point out in this video is that even for established, experienced, even famous authors, this kind of doubt and insecurity is kind of par for the course. This is a normal part of writing a book. And so I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit and show you what it looks like, what my process looks like. I'm also working on a book this November, although my goals are a little bit bigger than the flat 50K. But let me start also by saying one of the common problems is that you are comparing your first draft to somebody else's finished copy. And your first draft, anyone's first draft, is never going to be very good. So one of the first problems that people have and get frustrated about when they're trying to write their first book is that it's just not very good. They recognize as they're writing it that it sucks, and that's really frustrating and demotivating. So especially when you're trying to complete 50,000 words a day, 50,000 words a month, you have to keep writing, you have to keep going to get to the end, and that can be really uncomfortable when maybe you're a third of the way through, maybe you've written 20,000 words, but they are objectively bad. You don't know what's going on. You know that the writing is terrible. So that's kind of the first point where there's a disconnect between writers who don't have the experience feel like they should be better writers in their first draft, when actually the first draft always has to kind of suck. You're always just figuring out the story. The really good writing stuff comes from the revisions. I have at least 3 really heavy rounds of revisions that I go through, and that's even after plotting. So I'm a really tight plotter. I know pretty much where my story is going, but even if I can get to the end and sort of figure it all out, map it all out, which I'll talk about later, it's still bad. It's still bad right now. I know that, once I get to the end and I know what the story is, I can go back and fill in the blanks and tighten it up and start to put down the really good words that I will be satisfied with. But that's editing and stuff. That's not first draft stuff. And the problem is if you're writing, you're trying to get your 50,000 words, you get stuck because you go back with revision, which sometimes can feel safer or easier. For me, definitely, I'm more comfortable in revision than I am in the drafting phases. I don't like writing poorly. I don't like that my writing sucks when I'm stumbling through it, but that's also something I've become accustomed to. It's never easier, it's never less uncomfortable, but I know that that's part of the process and I just get through it. So let me move on to the next one. Hopefully that helps a little bit with is my writing bad? Am I a bad writer? This is a question I also saw on Twitter. Someone asked, are you a good writer? And some people say yes, some people say no, but my comment was basically yes after 3 rounds of revision. I know that I can be a good writer, but I'm not in the first draft. And I think that's pretty normal for most people. But if you're not aware of that, it can be kind of demotivating. But the second thing I see a lot with Nanowrimo specifically is that people who are pantsers as opposed to plotters. A pantser is someone who writes from the seat of their pants. And I've talked a lot about this. I just did a big presentation about creativity at a university. And in a Time article from a few years ago, they separated these 2 types of creativity, which were the intuitive and the analytical. And the intuitive feels better, it feels more magical because it's more satisfying. So most people who enjoy writing as a process and are passionate about it, they enjoy the intuitive satisfaction where you're stumbling into the words, you don't know what's going to happen, and you get this boost of inspiration like lightning. It feels like it's magical, and it's extraordinarily satisfying, which is the reason that most people write at all. They like that feeling. And the problem is that's not necessarily a way to write a good book. It can definitely work for some people. Some people are intuitive pantsers and they write good books. But for the majority of people who don't have the experience writing books, the nice thing is that at least focuses on the passion, and you should focus on the passion in the beginning, because otherwise you'll get demotivated. And also possibly, maybe if this is your first attempt at NaNoWriMo, it doesn't matter if the book is bad. All you're trying to do is figure out whether or not, it's to prove to yourself you're capable of putting out 50,000 words of a potential book project, whether or not it's all terrible. The danger, I think, is if you've done 5 or 10 NaNoWriMos and you've never completed a manuscript and you just kind of keep doing it as a creative exercise, the danger is that you're never getting any better. And if you're an intuitive writer or a pantser, you may always make the same mistakes without ever fixing them. And there's a good chance when you finish your manuscript, you don't know how to fix it or improve it because it's so shoddy. It's got so many good, beautiful pieces, but no kind of coherent story readers can latch onto. And that's where people get stuck. So I'm a big fan of pushing plotting outlines, even though some people feel like it makes them less creative, which is probably true. It's less inspired, it's less intuitive, it doesn't feel as much fun. But the advantage is when you actually put in the words, even if it's more work and it doesn't feel as magical, you're much closer to something that could be a good book, or at least a finished book, or at least any kind of book, like a manuscript that someone could actually read and get the story. If you're just pantsing, especially if you're spinning your wheels, it's day 10 of NaNoWriMo. I see a lot of people saying, I don't know what happens next. Tell me what should happen next with my characters. And no one else can fix that for you. It's very difficult to fix or figure out while you're going through it. Right. But at the same time, even if you have heavily plotted your outline, I started NaNoWriMo with an outline of like 10 or 20,000 words, scenes and notes, what I think what might happen. I've gone through it a dozen times. I came out with a pretty clear understanding of the outline, all the pivotal scenes I want to hit, roughly the right order they go into. So I've kind of got, my story, and it's still hard to put down the words. And as I'm writing it, there's still a ton of inspiration and intuitive discovery, because even if you know what's going to happen, you don't know exactly how it's going to play out. Even if I know what happens in the scene, I know what has to happen in the scene, but I don't know what it looks like. For me personally, I'm a very visual writer. I can't write the words until I can see it in my head. So I have to often, I'll go out to coffee or I'll go to the couch. Sometimes if I'm stuck, I can't write the words because I haven't seen it yet. So I have to keep playing around with the specific scene, which I can't get to until I'm close to it. So until I finish the previous chapter or the previous scene, I'm not close enough to the current scene to see the problems or how to get into it or whatever. Like I know where I am and I know where I need to go, but there's that whole transition. How much of the journey do I show? How does it actually unfold or play out? And most of that stuff is still in discovery phases. So like right now with this book, I started pretty strong. I already have like 70,000 words, but I'm trying to get to, well over 100. So I've got another 50K probably to write and 3 more weeks to write it. And it's okay if it's all pretty bad, if I just very quickly gloss over until I can get to the ending. And most of it is pretty bad. A lot of it is skipped. A lot of it is, if you get stuck, sometimes you have to skip the transitions and you have to skip to, wherever your characters start talking to each other. You have to get to whatever interests you. The transitions you can go back and fix. Whenever you can get into an active scene, that's where you want to start. So whenever something's happening, where characters are talking, you can fix a lot of things later and like clean it up so it sort of flows together better. But you have to have something there first. You have to have the major action of the scene. So like right now, there was one battle scene. They're doing some journey. It's a vampire book, so there's a lot of new weird stuff about the characters and the vampires and the daylight and, who's allowed to be out in the open. I want something to be happening, so I might throw in something dramatic, some action scene. On the other hand, the next battle scene I'm writing towards is going to be a very big, devastating battle scene, the big battle scene of this book with a side character death. So I don't know exactly how I'm going to get into that. I know I'm going to a new city they haven't been to before, so I have to play around with, some kind of ambush event where I show them interacting with the world and trying to make new allies, and then some kind of ambush event where everything goes terribly wrong and there's a big battle. I know what happens, but I haven't written it yet. I haven't seen it yet, so it's a lot of avoidance right now. I'm definitely not writing the words right now because I'm stuck in that scene, but it's only because I haven't attempted to get that scene yet. And I think that's kind of common with writing. It's a little bit like Tetris, where there's all these falling pieces and you can spot, this falling piece, this scene could be really cool, but you're not quite sure how it all fits together yet. You might have to just write it quickly, block it out to feel the shape of it, and then start turning it around and seeing where it's going to fit. And, hopefully, I've plotted this out, so I don't think when I finish it, I'm not planning on doing huge rearrangements. I think everything's probably going to be in the right place. But first, there's going to be a ton of cleaning and editing with the transitions and making it, from a bunch of mini little episodes into one full chapter. And cleaning it up is just the first part. Then I have to go in and add, all the really heavy emotional stuff. You have to make it matter. You have to show what your characters are feeling. You have to show the motivation, which is something I do in my third pass of revisions, where you start with what actually happens, and then you make sure there are no plot holes by focusing on why your characters are making these choices. Why are they putting themselves at risk rather than doing nothing? And you have to give them strong motivations for them taking action. There's also a really good balance between the slower scenes and the action scenes, which is why I said earlier, I feel like there should be some action, because it's basically a transportation phase where nothing is happening. And I'm tempted to put in something to make that really exciting. On the other hand, when you have a major character death or when you have a final battle scene, the space before that can be pretty slow and pretty bonding. It's an opportunity for a bonding episode. Specifically, when you kill off a character, right before that, you have to show that character's emotional catharsis in a way. You have to kind of resolve all of their personal story quests or story ambitions, and give them kind of this place where, for the first time, they're sort of starting to be happy. They're sort of in a place, an okay place, where they're optimistic or positive. Then when you kill them off, it's a much more brutal character death. And there's memes about, whether character deaths are ever validated, in terms of the side character's story arc or the main character's story arc. Often side quest characters' deaths are just to hit an emotional peak with your main character. That's kind of how I'm using it. And I'm a little tempted, I'm a little worried about doing it, because it's always, your readers don't like when you kill off a character that they love, but it can make a much more powerful story. This is the third book in a series, so it's definitely the right time to do it. Anyway, but that's kind of where I wanted to point out with the two major things that people complain about is my writing isn't good enough. Am I a good writer? The answer is nobody is a good writer. It's always hard. It doesn't matter. You just have to put in the work. But then also, if you don't know where you're going, if you're stuck and you don't know what happens next, some of that is discovery, where you're only going to be able to figure out the plot holes once you have written a rough draft. Once you've kind of seen the vague shape of the main story, that's when you start identifying the plot holes, which are mostly due to character motivation. And you can ask them, why are they doing this? Why don't they not do this? There's some basic questions I have in my book on crafting, Bookcraft, which goes into plot holes, or some of my other presentations. But that's mostly what I want to say. But it gets into number 3, which is I give up. So number 1 is, am I good enough? And the answer is yes. It's a conditional yes, because you're expecting yourself to be here. And the truth is everybody is always here. In every book, in every rough draft, they're always starting at the bottom, clobbering a bunch of crap together, and then it slowly becomes something good. And there's a weird thing with writing. The better you are at writing, the more experience you get, the less satisfied you're going to be with your rough drafts. The bigger the disconnect between the crappy first rough draft and these successful books that you've published that people have liked. So it never really gets easier. Even though your books might be getting objectively better, you still feel objectively worse about the quality you're putting out, at least in the first rough draft. But the second one is, I don't know where I'm going. That's something you need to fix halfway with plotting and really understanding plotting, story architecture. Even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it doesn't feel satisfying, it's going to save you so much time. But especially in Nanowrimo, where the challenge is just to keep writing and putting in words, what you don't want to do is just be putting out 2,000 words of crap every day that you know is not usable. Like, you know it's not going to further your story. You're not in discovery phase anymore. You're just kind of bullshitting to put words on the paper. If you find yourself doing that, take a few days off and focus on the plotting until you figure it out. Like I said, sometimes it's like you can't figure out the next stage until you're right there. So if you feel like you've been doing well and then you've hit a roadblock, you need to figure out what needs to happen next in your story. You can do that with plotting or story architecture or suggestions. My 24 plot point chapter outline is really good for figuring out, where you are in the story and what needs to happen next. But writing is always going to be kind of hard, and you're always sort of going to get stuck in the middle. Plotting can help, but you also need to kind of be aware that getting stuck and then figuring out how to fill the hole, that's a normal part of every book that you're going to be writing. That's part of the process, and you kind of need to schedule time around that. You might need to do your 2,000 words, and then you might need to set aside a couple hours a day just for, and this is often when I'm, taking a shower or going for a walk or eating dinner or whatever, where I've written something and now I feel mentally like I'm ready to attack the next portion, but I'm not ready to write those words yet because I haven't seen it yet. I haven't figured out what happens yet. So there has to be some downtime or break between the words you wrote and the next scene that's coming, where you can take some time off and really, figure out how it's all going to play out in your head before you try to just sit down and write the words. And so that last one was just I give up. I see a lot of people quitting Nanowrimo, where they're quitting after only 10 days. And the solution to that is that you can never choose to write 50,000 words. Like 50,000 words in a month, I'm going to choose, because if you make that one decision, you can break that decision with one decision. So whenever you're feeling down, you can say, I'm giving up for the next 20 days. I'm giving up Nanowrimo. I'm not cut out for this. I can't do it. And whether or not you're doing Nanowrimo, just book writing in general, it's too easy to give yourself an out and just say, I'm no longer comfortable writing this book, so I'm going to quit. What you can do instead is you can always make it a daily choice, where not even I'm going to write my 2,000 words today, but I'm going to open my document today, or I'm going to sit down for an hour today and think about it, and make it fun for yourself. Go out for cake and ice cream or coffee or whatever, and just say, I'm going to have an hour by myself with a notepad to think about the story that I want to write and why I'm stuck and what needs to happen later. Often the creative ideation, where you're figuring things out, where you're seeing the scenes, that's completely separate from when you're sitting down with your Bluetooth keyboard and your monitor of whatever size, and trying to put down the words. Those are two different headspaces. So understand that those are two different things. They can be separate, and also understand that just because you're stuck or feeling frustrated right now doesn't mean you're never going to get better, or that you're never going to finish this book. And even if you're considering giving up Nanowrimo, that the goal is not necessarily to write a good book. It's just to learn how to commit to putting in more words on the page. Sitting with the discomfort, experiencing the frustration and the discomfort, and deciding, I'm going to do it anyway, even if this sucks. I'm going to keep putting down the words, even if they're terrible, because I know I'm learning only in those places of discomfort do you care enough to do your research and read about story structure or plotting or architecture. Or, if you're stuck, there's a reason for it. It's probably a knowledge gap or an information gap. Either you don't know how to tell the story you want to tell, or you don't know what happens next in your story. Both of those things can be fixed with study and time and creative application of your brain power, but you have to make the decision to do that. NaNoWriMo is not necessarily about writing a good book. It's about facing the fears and the demons that come with recognizing that the thing that you want to do is something that you don't have the experience or the talent or the skill to do yet at the moment. You may think that you do, but once you're halfway through a book, it can get really frustrating when you're like writing crap and you don't know what happens next in the story. If you haven't felt that before, of course, it's very scary. And you may be asking, am I cut out for this? I don't know what to do next. Somebody help me, please. And you're posting on Facebook or Reddit to try to get help with your story. These are not easy things, but they are definitely things that you can do. And most people won't, because most people will get frustrated and quit and fail. That's why those authors who continue to, be uncomfortable with writing long enough, like thousands of hours, and even, after I've written like 20 novels and I'm still uncomfortable with the writing. Writing is hard work. But I also know that this is part of my process, so I don't freak out about it. I'll probably finish this book in the next month or two. It'll probably be pretty good. If it isn't, it's not the end of the world. I've done that. I've published books that aren't any good before. I've missed my pre-order dates many times before. I set those because I like having hard deadlines so that I am motivated to finish the book, because I have significant problems with productivity and procrastination. But all of those things, like I'm aware of those things because I've done these things many times before. Hope that helps. Thanks. Bye-bye.